A single machine built in one small Dutch town decides whether your phone works, whether AI models get trained, whether your car's onboard computer functions at all. It weighs about as much as a loaded school bus, costs more than a jumbo jet, and only one company on the entire planet knows how to build it. That company is ASML, and its actual power doesn't come from the machine itself. It comes from something almost nobody can name: the light hidden inside it. For 30 years, that light seemed impossible to replicate any other way. Then in February 2021, a quiet experiment in a Berlin physics lab proved there might be a second road to the exact same light, one that skips ASML's entire process. No tin explosions, no droplets, just electrons circling a ring. This video is about whether that discovery actually threatens the most powerful monopoly in modern technology, or whether it's just an interesting physics result destined to sit on a shelf for another decade. I want you to hold onto one word as this story unfolds: bottleneck. It's going to keep resurfacing at every turn. Every chip in your pocket, every AI system you've ever used, every satellite guiding your GPS, all of it gets printed using light manufactured inside ASML's machines. Your car's computer, the medical scanner at your doctor's office, the servers running the internet itself, all of it traces back to one factory floor in one Dutch town. That chokehold has pushed the company's market value past $670 billion, a European record. When CNBC asked CEO Christophe Fouquet what was stopping ASML from charging even more, he essentially admitted they hold every card at the table. One analyst, Daniel Newman of the Futurum Group, put it more bluntly: this company has the market completely cornered. To understand why, you need to understand what actually happens inside a chip factory. Every advanced chip gets made the same basic way. You shine light through a stencil onto a silicon wafer, like a shadow puppet cast onto a wall. Wherever light hits, it carves a microscopic pattern. Stack enough of those patterns together, and you get a working chip. The smaller you can carve those patterns, the more powerful the chip becomes, and to carve smaller, you need shorter wavelengths of light. Think of it like writing with a pen. A fat marker can write your name just fine, but it can't write a letter small enough to fit on a grain of rice. The chips inside your phone right now require light with a wavelength of just 13.5 nanometers, called extreme ultraviolet, or EUV. A human hair measures roughly 80,000 nanometers across. This light is nearly 6,000 times thinner than that single strand. Here's the problem: light that short doesn't exist anywhere in usable form in nature. You can't buy an EUV bulb. You have to manufacture the light itself from absolute scratch, and that turned out to be one of the hardest engineering problems humanity has ever solved. ASML's solution sounds like science fiction. Inside their machine, a device fires microscopic droplets of liquid tin, each one roughly a quarter the width of a human hair, falling through a vacuum chamber at 70 meters per second. As each droplet falls, a laser strikes it twice in rapid succession. The first pulse flattens it into a tiny pancake shape. The second pulse vaporizes it into plasma reaching roughly 200,000 degrees Celsius, considerably hotter than the surface of the sun. In that instant, the dying tin flashes out a burst of exactly the right wavelength of light. Then the entire sequence repeats 50,000 times every single second. The mess this creates is enormous. Tin vapor coats everything inside the sealed chamber, forcing engineers to flood it with hydrogen gas just to sweep away the debris. The mirrors that collect the light degrade constantly and require expensive, continuous maintenance. Every hour spent on upkeep is an hour a tool worth hundreds of millions of dollars sits idle. There's also a hidden cost that rarely gets discussed. EUV light is so fragile it can't pass through normal lenses. It gets absorbed by nearly everything, including ordinary glass and even air. So the entire optical path relies on mirrors instead. And even the best mirror ever manufactured loses roughly 30% of the light with every single bounce. The light bounces around 11 times before reaching the silicon wafer. After 11 bounces at 30% loss each, only a sliver of the original light survives the journey. That means you need an absurd amount of raw power just to end up with barely enough usable light at the end. ASML doesn't build every component alone either. The lasers come from a German company called Trumpf. The mirrors, some of the flattest surfaces ever manufactured, come from Zeiss, another German firm. The core light source technology traces back to a California company called Cymer, which ASML acquired years ago. What ASML actually owns is the accumulated knowledge to make all these nearly impossible components function together, tens of thousands of times per second, for thousands of hours without failure. That expertise took decades to build, and that's the bottleneck. ASML isn't merely the largest maker of these machines, it's the only maker on Earth. There's no second supplier anywhere. A standard EUV machine costs upward of $200 million. The newest generation with larger high-NA optics runs around $380 million per unit, roughly double for a single tool. Every cutting-edge chip on the planet has to pass through one of these machines. There's no alternate door, no workaround. When ASML reported its 2025 results, annual revenue landed near 33 billion euros, with 60 machines already booked for delivery in 2026 alone. This single fact became the foundation for America and the Netherlands' entire strategy for slowing China's chip industry. The logic was simple. This light source is so difficult to replicate that nobody can copy it and nobody can route around it. Block the machine and you block the chips. Over the past couple of years, you've probably seen headlines claiming China secretly cloned ASML's scanner, that the monopoly's already broken. Most of that coverage is exaggerated or flatly wrong. China hasn't replicated ASML's tin droplet plasma source. Copying that process, droplet for droplet, would take years nobody wants to spend, and might never fully succeed. What nobody anticipated was a team of physicists asking an entirely different question. What if you could produce the exact same light using completely different physics? That's precisely what a research group connected to Tsinghua University pursued. Forget tin droplets entirely. Picture instead a racetrack, not for cars but for electrons, a large ring similar to equipment found at national physics laboratories. You accelerate electrons to nearly the speed of light and send them looping around this ring continuously. Normally, electrons inside that beam travel in loose, spread-out clumps, roughly a centimeter long, spaced about 60 centimeters apart. Those loose clumps produce ordinary light, useful for scientific research, but nowhere near powerful or focused enough to print chips at meaningful volume. Picture a crowd clapping randomly, plenty of noise, zero rhythm. Using a precisely tuned laser inside a device called an undulator, researchers can nudge those electrons so that instead of spreading out loosely, they compress into remarkably tiny, evenly spaced clusters, each roughly a single micrometer long, about 1,000 times smaller than where they started. Now imagine that same clapping crowd, except a conductor walks in and gets everyone clapping at the exact same instant. What you hear isn't scattered noise anymore, it's a single unified thunderclap. When electrons bunch together like this and move in perfect synchronization, the light they emit snaps into focus. All the light waves align, and the beam starts behaving like a laser, smooth and continuous. Because the electrons keep circling the ring indefinitely, they keep producing this light continuously in a steady state. That's the origin of the name, steady-state microbunching, or SSMB. Compare that against ASML's approach, and the contrast becomes the entire point. ASML's light source is essentially a strobe light, producing EUV through 50,000 separate violent explosions every second, along with all the debris and downtime those explosions create. SSMB explodes nothing whatsoever. No tin, no droplets, no debris to clean out, just electrons gently guided into producing a clean, continuous river of extreme ultraviolet light. On paper, the numbers are staggering. Peer-reviewed research describes SSMB as a viable path toward kilowatt-level average power in the EUV range. For context, ASML's current production sources output a few hundred watts, and the company is spending the rest of this decade just fighting to reach 1,000 watts by roughly 2030. That confidence from ASML's engineers is genuinely earned, but it's the confidence of an incumbent betting everything on their current approach, staying dominant. SSMB is chasing that same target from a completely different starting line, one that could blow straight through the mirror bounce problem crippling ASML's design. Here's the detail that should really grab your attention: what this means for the bottleneck itself. In ASML's setup, Every single machine needs its own dedicated light source bolted inside, one source per machine, at $380 million apiece. But a ring full of circling electrons works differently. Because the electrons loop around a large circle, you could theoretically position many separate chip printing stations around that ring's exterior, like workbenches arranged around one central brilliant lamp, all drawing from the same shared light source. In China, this concept picked up a nickname, the lithography cannon, and that name captures the ambition perfectly. Not a replacement for one machine, but a single source capable of powering an entire factory floor. That flips the entire economic model in a way that's easy to overlook. ASML sells one giant, delicate light source bolted to one scanner for hundreds of millions of dollars, one machine at a time. A storage ring rearranges that completely. You build the expensive, difficult part once, the accelerator itself, then attach comparatively simpler exposure stations to it, as many as the ring can support. If that approach ever scales to production, the single most expensive component gets distributed across an entire floor of machines instead of loaded into each individual unit. ASML's entire pricing structure starts looking considerably more fragile under that scenario. Credit here matters, and this is where a lot of coverage gets tribal and misses the actual story. The core theory behind steady-state micro-bunching was conceived around 2010 by Alexander Chow, a Taiwanese-American physicist working at Stanford, alongside his student Daniel Ratner. They published the theory, and then it mostly sat dormant on paper since nobody possessed the right equipment to actually test it. That changed once a young physicist pursuing his doctorate at Tsinghua University picked up Chow's idea and extended the underlying mathematics considerably further. Chow himself helped connect the Tsinghua team with accelerator physicists in Germany, and together with Germany's National Metrology Institute and the Helmholtz Center in Berlin, they gained access to a machine capable of running the actual test. Here's the twist that rarely gets mentioned. The experiment proving this concept works didn't happen in China. It happened in Berlin using a specialized ring called the metrology light source, the first ring in the world ever built to operate in the unusual mode SSMB requires. Their results, published in Nature in February 2021, confirmed the theory. A real electron beam was forced to micro-bunch and radiated light exactly as predicted. The crucial jump from a nice equation on a whiteboard to a demonstrated physical reality. Every export restriction the United States and Netherlands imposed on China's chip industry rested on one core assumption. ASML's road was the only road. If the same 13.5 nanometer light can be produced from a ring of electrons instead of exploding tin, then those restrictions end up aimed at entirely the wrong target. Like posting a guard at the front door while somebody quietly cuts through the back wall 100 meters away. China isn't operating alone here either. In the United States, a startup called X-Light is pursuing a closely related concept, using a large particle accelerator and free electron laser to generate EUV light, then piping it into existing scanners. The US government committed $150 million to X-Light through the CHIPS and Science Act. Former Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger signed on to lead its board, and the company is separately raising another $350 million from private investors, targeting a working test system by 2028. When serious money and serious physicists on both sides of the Pacific converge on the same conclusion simultaneously, that suggests something real is happening. Now, here's where the cold water seriously matters. That 2021 experiment proved the underlying mechanism works, but it didn't build a functioning chip factory. The gap between physics checking out on paper and printing a billion chips reliably is enormous. Anyone claiming the monopoly's already broken is selling you something untrue. In that Berlin experiment, the electron bunches carried only a tiny fraction of the charge a high-power source would actually require, comparable to proving you can start a campfire with a magnifying glass. Impressive and real, certainly, but a long way from powering an entire city. ASML's own history illustrates just how long this road can stretch. When scientists first attempted this kind of light back in the 1980s, plenty of experts declared it flatly impossible. It took roughly 30 years and tens of billions of dollars to prove them wrong. China is effectively starting that same clock now, on the light source alone, which represents just one component inside a machine containing hundreds of thousands of other parts. There's also an obstacle money simply cannot solve, something chip experts call the yield gap. Researchers at Europe's IMEC Research Center describe this as the hardest challenge of all. The brutal distance separating beautiful laboratory light from printing millions of chips where almost none come out defective. You can build the cleanest EUV beam ever created and still fail entirely if your mirrors sit a nanometer out of alignment. That expertise takes years of repeated failure to accumulate. You can't buy it, steal it, or download it. The physical scale required presents its own massive challenge too. Reports describe a facility under construction in China's Xiong'an district, featuring a ring somewhere between 100 and 150 meters in circumference, closer to constructing a space telescope than assembling a factory tool. And the underlying physics still carries open questions. Getting from the Berlin demonstration to a stable kilowatt-class EUV cannon running inside a working factory represents years of hard work at minimum, and it could still hit some wall nobody's discovered yet. None of these obstacles let ASML relax, though. The moment a solid alternative exists, even one sitting a decade away from printing its first actual chip, the belief that this particular bottleneck is permanent starts quietly cracking. And that belief is precisely what the entire Western strategy was constructed upon. A crack in that confidence changes how China negotiates during trade discussions, and it changes how safe the world's biggest chip makers feel betting everything on one supplier inside one small country. Consider what a cheaper, more powerful, cleaner light source would actually do to the underlying economics. Right now, every wafer coming out of a leading fab carries a slice of that $380 million machine cost baked directly into its price, plus all the downtime from tin debris cleanup. The entire industry runs on artificial scarcity, a small number of these tools all sourced from one supplier, rationed among the handful of companies wealthy enough to afford them: TSMC, Samsung, Intel, and even they wait in line for years. Crack the light source open, and you threaten that scarcity directly, which happens to be the exact thing making ASML worth $670 billion in the first place. Some analysts have started sketching a future where advanced chip making splits into two separate tracks entirely: a Western track built around ASML's tin plasma EUV, and a Chinese track built around particle accelerators and alternative physics. Whether that full split ever materializes, the fact that it's now even plausible represents a real shift. China has reportedly poured tens of billions of dollars into building its own chip-making system from the ground up, with the Electron Ring project sitting squarely at the center of that push. There's even a second, noisier Chinese effort chasing EUV through a different method, using laser-induced discharge plasma, though that approach remains far less proven and wrapped in considerably more rumor. What that team demonstrated inside a Berlin laboratory doesn't break ASML's hold on the industry today, and it might not for another decade. But it proved something nearly as dangerous to the monopoly itself. It proved the bottleneck was never permanent. ASML's entire advantage always came down to controlling a single choke point, and a monopoly built on a bottleneck only survives as long as that bottleneck remains the only path through. Right now, ASML is still king. Their machines print the chips sitting in your pocket. Their revenue lands in the tens of billions annually, and they're booked solid for years ahead. But the world that's run entirely on one impossible light source is now staring at the possibility that light could someday come from somewhere else entirely. Not today, not next year, but the physics says it's possible. And when physics quietly opens a door, money and engineers eventually walk straight through it. If a shift this significant has been quietly building right under everyone's radar, I want to know what other breakthroughs you think might be hiding in plain sight right now. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you made it this far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.